Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, The 5 Tenets of Change Management. I am personally honored and excited to be introducing Catherine Jeha, one of our founding members and the head of training at ProClipse Consulting. Catherine is a trusted coach and advisor. She is a reference to her clients and all of us here at the ProClipse family. Catherine is also a ProSci certified advanced instructor. Thank you, Catherine, for choosing me to do the introduction. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, Talal, and thank you. And I join Talal also in welcoming everyone for joining us today.
Before I pass it on to Catherine, I'd just like to go over a couple of points for everyone. For our regular attendees, we will still be using Poll EV for our engagement polls, but we will minimize those throughout the session to make sure we leave time for the Q&A. In our last couple of webinars, we did not get the time to do the Q&As live, and we want to make sure we do so today. So please feel free to post your questions on the Q&A panel and not in the normal chat plane, please, because that's probably not possible. Let your questions flow as and when they come to your mind. So our Poll EV link is the following. It's pollev.com/ProClipse Consulting 100. I will just chat it in the chat pane for everyone, so it's easy for you to click on. And I would advise that your smartphone is probably the easiest way, so you can keep your eyes on the screen. And if you leave that browser window up, it will update each time we update the poll with a new one. It automatically updates on your screen. So today we're going to spend our time looking at the 5 tenets of change management, which are going to help us more effectively position change management to help us explain what it is, how it relates to what the organization is up to, and what value we bring when we bring structured change management to our initiatives and projects. Now to you, Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Talal. So what we are going to be doing today is position change management in context, using the 5 tenets to build that understanding and the connection. We're going to ask you to apply the 5 tenets on one of our initiatives to help you make the connections and really solidify the framework. And for this to work, we are going to need a piece of paper and something to write with. I want you to actually divide the piece of paper. If you can put for the slide for us, the previous slide, please. What I want you to do is I want you to divide your paper as shown on the right-hand side of the slide. And you are going to need an initiative to consider. An initiative that you can think about as we go through the 5 tenets. It might be an initiative you are working on right now, or an initiative that you have completed a couple of years ago, or even a project that you might have some knowledge about. But it's very important to have a project or a change in mind, so that as we cover each tenet, you will write down how does that particular tenet connect to your project. So I'm going to start now by using a quote from Stephen Covey. Priority is a function of context. And if we want to get priority for change management, we really need to be able to explain it in context. And that is what the 5 tenets will help us do. So the 5 tenets were actually introduced first by Jeff Hyatt, who's ProSci founder, and Tim Creasy, ProSci CIO, in their book, Change Management, the People Side of Change. It was their attempt to advance and simplify the case for change management by telling the story in context. So what is a tenet? A tenet is a principle or belief that we hold to be true. And the 5 tenets are really going to help us form that simple, logical, compelling way to explain what change management is and why it actually matters. So tenet 1, we change for a reason. Tenet 2, organizational change requires individual change. And tenet 3, organizational outcomes are the collective results of individual change. Now notice what's important here. How many times did you hear me mention change management in the first 3 tenets? And the answer is actually 0. So to build the context for what and why change management matters, we begin first by describing the nature of how change happens, the reality of how change happens in our organization, and it is only in Tenet 4 that we introduce change management. We introduce it as an enabling framework to manage the people side of change. And with Tenet 5, we close the loop. We ultimately apply change management to realize the benefits and desired outcomes of change. Now, change management helps us achieve the reason we set out to change in the first place. And don't worry if you don't remember these 5 tenets, we're going to go over them a lot during this session. So another quote that I would like to share is from Kubra Said, who is a famous Indian actress and TV host. Kubra said, "Asking questions is the first way to begin change." And so what I want to do for you is introduce 5 plain language questions that go along with the tenets to begin change. Again, the tenets are those beliefs that we hold to be true. So these plain language questions help us get to the essence of the core of what we are trying to explain to somebody by asking a really thoughtful, plain language question. So tenet 1, we change for a reason. And the plain language question is, why are we changing? Tenet 2, organizational change requires individual change. The question we can ask to start prompt to the thinking is, who has to do their job differently and how? Tenet 3, the plain language question is, how much of our outcomes depend on adoption and usage? By asking this question, we get the sponsor, the project manager, the Lean Six Sigma consultant, or the business analyst to start to think about the connection between people and the results we are trying to achieve. Tenet 4, what will we do to support adoption and usage? And that's how we stage change management as the solution to the reality of how change happens. And tenet 5 plain language question is, how will driving adoption and usage improve results? So when we ask these plain language questions, we enable others, again, whether it's a project manager or a sponsor, a communication specialist, to truly understand the what and the why, because they are processing it against their reality. Now, these are the plain language questions that we are going to pull forward throughout the course of this webinar. And now we're going to start by deconstructing each of these 5 tenets. So tenet 1, we change for a reason, and we are going to take one step back here and think about what change is. At ProSci, we describe it as a movement out of the current state through a transition state to ultimately reach a future state. It's stepping out of what I know into something that's probably going to be rocky to try to arrive at a place that is better than today. Arno van Gennep was a cultural anthropologist studying the rites of passage around the world back in the beginning of the 20th century. And he is actually the first one that gives us change as 3 states. But later, many of the other contributors and thought leaders in the discipline of change management have used this frame to better help us understand how change actually happens. Now, Van Gennep described it as a separation out of whatever previous stage of life you were in, into a liminality moment, and then into incorporation, stepping out into that new phase. Changes in our life happen by stepping out of today, through that liminality, and into the future. Kurt Lewin famously described this as unfreezing, moving, and refreezing. William Bridges gives us all kinds of insights about the psychological risks, and he used the ending, the neutral zone, and the new beginning. Beckard, Harris, Lamarche, Connell, Ackerman, Anderson, Salerno, Brooke, all of them have broken change down into 3 phases, because when we break change down into its moving parts, we can more effectively understand how to move change forward. Now, I know people will push back and say there's so much change going on today, and that is the notion, and that this notion of the 3 states of change does not really hold up in this VUCA world. And I agree with you. There's a lot of changes going on. However, the reality is that this is how most of our organizations feel like today. We have many connected and dependent changes all happening simultaneously. Some of them are traditional sequential, some of them are iterative by nature, and some of them are new technologies, or some of them are figuring out how to work in our new hybrid workplace. But even if organizationally it feels slushy, each initiative that we are trying to implement to improve the performance of the organization steps out of how things are done today through a transition period and into a new way of being. And that new future state often becomes our new current state. It becomes the new way things are done, and it becomes so normal that it will become really our current state. So the three states that are so valuable for helping us make this sense of this change. And when we talk about we change for a reason, which is tenet 1, there are two sides of the reason for change that ProSci has built out in our approach to drive more successful outcomes. Now, if you look at the right-hand side of the slide, you will see the organizational benefits, what the organization gains from implementing this change. And here we ask, what is the problem or opportunity that the organization is up against? If the problem is solved or the opportunity is realized, what are we going to benefit? And how will we benefit? And ultimately, how are we going to know if those benefits are realized? Now, if you look at the left-hand side of the slide, there is the project objectives. What is the project actually achieving? And how does the project contribute to solving the problem or realizing the opportunity? In my experience, there are a lot of times organizations and initiatives will define one or the other, but most of the time they come up short of capturing both. Now, part of our job as change agents is to help extract both the project objectives and the organizational benefits from the project teams or senior leaders that we support. And there are a lot of different reasons that trigger us to change. And what you see across the horizontal line, we have internal reasons and we have external reasons. And vertically, you have those current conditions and those future goals. Current things happening internally, like strategic plans, communication, continuous improvement, demands to do more, all of these will trigger us to take on a project or an initiative. There are also external reasons that result in a lot of change being needed, such as market economic shifts, competitive threats, regulation, legislation, COVID, which we have, experienced recently. And these things that are happening today outside of our organization could trigger change to happen. So we also have triggers that live out in the future aspirations that we are trying to achieve as a result of undertaking or launching an initiative. Examples internally, those might be lower cost, higher revenues, or externally, it might relate to more to our market share or customer satisfaction. All of these, among others, are triggers for why changes are being taken on in the organization. Now we are going to do our first short exercise and invite you all to take that sheet of paper that we mentioned earlier in the beginning and reflect on the reason for your change initiative. So what I want you to do is I want you to identify the project objectives, the organizational benefits, what are the expected results and outcomes for that change. And while doing so, I want you also to consider what is the value of having clarity and alignment around the reasons for success. And what are the consequences when we don't? So capture these on the upper left quadrant of your paper. And at the same time, we're going to use a poll for this exercise to share some of those triggers. So please use the link that Talal mentioned and chatted earlier. Great, we're getting things coming up, higher revenues, fewer errors, ahead of the competition. Competitive threats. Any more reasons? Any more triggers coming up? Continuous improvement. Any more lower costs? Competitive environment and constant need for change. Yeah, regulation, legislation, harmonization. Come on, let's get more coming up. Improve our orientation. Less risk exposure. A new company structure. That's really awesome. So synergies in workflow and opportunities. Excellent. So this is what you have just captured here. This is actually tenet 1, lower cost. And this is the reason we change. We change for a reason. And what I want to highlight here is that when we say we change for a reason, it doesn't mean that the reason for every change is the same. Only that there is a specific reason or objective for a given change. The reasons for change are as varied as change itself. And this is actually what you have captured in on the poll. All these different reasons for change. Excellent work. Thanks. So this will move us to tenet 2. Tenet 2 is organizational change requires individual change. And our plain language question is, who has to do their job differently and how? Because in the end, organizations don't change, but rather individuals do over time. Of course, the organization moves in a particular direction, it adapts, it adjusts, but it only changes through individuals showing up in a new way, individuals showing up and executing their role, their job, their work, their contribution to the organization in a new way. And we often tend to focus on change at the organization level. For example, like implementing an ERP or re-implementing an ERP or installing electronic medical records, documenting and optimizing business processes, or maybe starting to move and create this new hybrid workplace. But the truth is that each organizational change ultimately impacts how specific people do their job. And this is where change comes to life. I used to use this old legacy system, and now I'm using the new integrated system. I used to do what I needed to do. Now I'm following a new process. I used to report to X. Now I'm reporting to Y. So it is individuals making their own transition from current through transition to the future that results in organizational outcomes. So the true unit of change is the individual. And we looked at the current, transition, and future state earlier at the organizational level, but the reality of change is it comes to life, one person at a time. It's showing me a new way that brings this initiative to thrive. It is me showing up differently if I am an impacted person by this change. So ProClipse took one step further and introduced 10 aspects of change impact to help bring definition to what that actually means. Now, these 10 aspects describe components of somebody's job that their initiative may or may not impact. Now, is the change going to impact their processes? Is it going to impact their systems, their tools, their job roles? Is it going to be impacting their critical behaviors or their mindsets? And of course, here, mindset is demonstrated through behavior. So those two at the bottom are really very strongly connected. And what about the reporting structure? How performance reviews are conducted, the compensation. And finally, the last one is the location. Are they going to change location or are they going to stay in the same location? Now, these are actually the actual aspect of people's job that we need to be considering when we think about individual and organizational change. And what I want to highlight here is that a single initiative does not impact all groups at the same way. So over on your right-hand side of the screen, you see 4 rings. These rings will provide a visual representation of the application of the 10 aspects. Gray means no impact, green means low impact, yellow means medium impact, and red means very high impact. So to explain this more and make it live, I'll go for an example. So let us assume that we are going to install a brand new expense reporting system. And if we think of accounting, for example, or finance, who process all the employees' expenses on a regular basis, which aspect of their job do you think it will be impacted? Which of the rings will be representative of the application of 10 aspects? Now, if you answer the top ring or the second one, you are spot on. Another example, if we take another group, which, for example, the sales team. These people are all out about, traveling quite a bit, incurring different expenses, and they are filing expense reports weekly. Most of the aspects also here are going to be impacted too. But if, for example, we have employees who submit expense report once a quarter, it's going to barely impact them. And this might be represented by the lower ring. So who is going to be impacted and how helps us understand this second 10. Now, what you see on the slide is a simple tool we call yesterday, tomorrow exercise. This tool helps us put the 10 aspects of change impact in context. So if I take a particular group and say, for example, another example is I'm rolling out or upgrading it to a new CRM system. And I'm going to look at my account managers. And I will ask, how did their job look before the implementation? And what's going to be different after the change? Which aspect will be impacted? So are their processes going to be impacted? And to what degree on a scale of 0 to 5? At the extreme end, right, there is this scale of 0 to 5. 0 is no impact, 5 is high impact. Now you ask the same questions about all these 10 aspects. What about their system? What about their tools? What about their job roles? And so on. Now, taking these 10 aspects of change impact and really using them as a filter for making sense of the individual impacts, this will add value when we start to address Tenet 2 more directly. And now I'm going to hand over to you to do exercise number 2. And I want you to look at your own project. And remember, organizational change requires individual change. And our plain language question here is, who has to do the job differently and how? So for this exercise, we are not going to use the poll. You are going to do it individually for your own project. So I want you to ask yourself this plain language question. Who has to do the job differently and how? And the objective of Tenet 2 exercise is to capture down the groups that are going to be impacted by the change. So we're going to give you 60 seconds to do so. And we're going to start the buzzer. So as you are thinking of the groups that are going to be impacted by your change, consider also what aspects of each group will be greatly impacted. Is it going to be the processes, the systems, the tools, the job roles, the critical behavior, the mindset, attitude? Is it going to be a reporting structure that's going to be impacted, or the performance reviews, maybe the compensation or location? You can see all of these aspects on your on the slide. So I'm going to be quiet for a few seconds. Just a tip over here, if you write everyone and you think you're done, please scratch it out. This is where we get more granular. Who must do their job differently? And I want you to be as specific as you can.
Time's up.
Thanks, Talal. So what you have just done is that you started to make those connections and enhance the understanding of what and why of change management by capturing who is going to be impacted by this change and considering which aspects of their jobs are going to have the greatest impact. In other words, the degree to which a change produces result is directly correlated with individual change. And this leads us to tenet 3. Tenet 3 is organizational outcomes are the collective results of individual change. And our plain language question here is, how much of our outcome depend on adoption and usage? Now I will show you how we are going to really amplify that question. So to build out tenet 3, I'm going to begin with a quote from Vince Lombardi. And those for you who does not know who Vince Lombardi is, he is a football head coach and general manager at the American Football Green Bay Packers. And what Vince Lombardi said is that the achievements of an organization are the results of the combined effort of each individual. Of course, he's talking about American football team here, but this really holds very true for organizations as well. So we have talked about the concept of current transition and the future state. So for our organization to move to the future state, it ultimately requires individuals to move out of their current through their own transition to reach their own future state. But watch out what can happen to the lower part, to the image at the bottom of the slide. Here, a number of people did not even step out of the current state. We did not build enough of a compelling case to have them step out of the current state and into that transition towards the future. So what happened here is we lose them along the way. And if we did not bring them back out of the current state to begin with, what we are going to lose the value that was dependent on them adopting the solution. Now take another look at, again, at the to the extreme right of this bottom right of this slide. And we know that it is our natural physiological and psychological tendency to go back to what we used to do. And here we can lose some people that made it all the way to the future state. They can start to regress back to what they used to do. Now, this future state is what we call Swiss cheese future state. The organizational outcomes depend on helping each individual to get to their own future state. However, there are very few changes where it does not require somebody to do their job differently. There is a people-dependent portion of the return on investment of any product or initiative that we implement. And this people-dependent portion is different for different kinds of initiatives. And I'm going to share with you 2 examples to help bring this point home. Now, for each of the examples that I'm going to share, I want to ask yourself, how much of the expected return on investment depends on adoption and usage? So for project 1, we installed a motion-activated lights in meeting room. Now, how people-dependent is that? Well, certainly somebody's got to install them and to configure it. But how much of the ROI depends on adoption and usage? I'm going to keep walking in and out of the room in the same way I used to do before, right? I walk into the room, the lights will go on. And when I leave the room, the lights will go off. The energy saving from that solution is not dependent on my adoption and usage. So now let's take a look at the second example on the right-hand side. Here we install recycling compost bins in our office. What percentage of that value depends on people adopting and using the change? I would say a higher amount, of course, because if I decide to throw my soft drink can into the trash instead of the recycle bin, we're not going to get the value we expect from that initiative. And this is where the key question comes in. What percentage of overall results and outcomes depend on employee adoption and usage of the change? For our second example, if we say 70% depends on adoption and 30% on installation, that is a huge portion of the value we are trying to achieve. Now, next, I'm going to ask a follow-up question. How much are we investing out of our budget, out of our people and resources, out of our energy, out of our effort to drive and support employee adoption and usage? And the answer of this question is often very troubling. While 70% of what I'm trying to achieve out of this initiative is dependent on adoption and usage, imagine I'm investing only 3% to drive and support employee adoption and usage. In other words, I'm investing 97% to achieve only 30% of my desired outcome. That is not the way to drive the adoption and usage. We need to capture people's dependent ROI. So that is the way we are going to continue to build Tenet 3. Organizational outcomes are the collective result of individual change. It is the individual adoption and usage that drives achievement of people-dependent return on investment. So let's now go back to your own project. And I want you to think around connecting people to results. Identify the potential costs and risks to your change if adoption and usage does not line up with your project objectives outcomes. Second, estimate the percentage of expected results and outcome that depends on people changing how they do their job. Again, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to do so, and Talal is going to start the buzzer for us. And I want you also, if you want to dive deeper, I want you to consider how each group that you have identified in Tenet 2 contributes to the outcome or the results through their own adoption and usage. Here at this stage, you should be able to start drawing some lines and start making the connection between the reasons for change and the groups that are being impacted.
That's the buzzer.
Thank you, Talal. So that's Tenet 3. Since change is ultimately an individual phenomenon, it is these individual factors that drive or constrain the value a change creates. Now we're going to move to Tenet 4. Here again, I'm going to highlight the point that I made at the very beginning. Tenets 1, 2, and 3 did not even mention change management. Tenets 1, 2, and 3 are about describing the reality of how change happens, that we do it for a reason, that it requires individual change, and that the outcome we achieve are dependent on the collective results of those individual changes. We have never once mentioned change management, and that is the power of the 5 tenets in terms of positioning and context. Tenet 4 is where we introduce change management, and we introduce it as the solution to the reality of how change happens. Change management is that enabling framework for managing the people side of change. And the plain language question is, what will we do to support adoption and usage? Now, the unfortunate reality is that this is how most organizations attempt to support adoption and usage. an email on Monday, for a training on Tuesday, for go live on Wednesday. That is not the way to prepare and equip individuals for successful change. It's not the way to capture that 70% of people dependent return on investment. That's not the way to avoid the cost and risk associated with poor adoption and usage. And so change management is going to be the solution we use to the reality of how change comes to life. And at ProSci, we define it as the application of a structured process for leading the people side of change to achieve a desired outcome. That is what it is at the project level or initiative. But we certainly know that it is a little bit bigger than that as well. So at the organizational level, it's a leadership competency for enabling change. And that leadership competency should be grown across the organization, top to bottom, left to right. And as change agents, we need to start to build these individual skill sets. So when people understand the role and know how they can contribute to more successful change at an organization level, then it becomes a source of competitive advantage. It becomes a differentiator, a core competency that lets us be more agile and responsive. So that is how we are going to define change management. The way we are going to bring it to life in this tenet is by looking at two pieces. First, the outcome desired, and the second, the activities required. So what are the outcomes desired? When tenet 2 and 3 tells us that change happens one person at a time. So the outcome we desire is that each individual who has to do their job in a new way has sufficiently adopted and proficiently is using the solution. And this is where the ProSci EDCAR model helps us describe and understand the outcome desired. So as for the activities required, it is what we do as a change practitioner to support that initiative. And as we explore the activities required, we are going to talk about how those activities need to happen in context, as a process, by a system, and through a specific levers. And ultimately, they drive some of those outcomes desired that we need. We do not do any of these activities for the sake of doing activities. We do the activities to support individuals through their journey of EDCAR. And EDCAR is ProSci's individual change model. EDCAR is an acronym for the 5 elements that need to be present for any individual to successfully transition through change and start using the change on an ongoing basis. The first element is awareness of the need for change. It is when I understand why the change is needed. Not that I know what's going to happen, but I have also internalized why the change is happening. I get to a point where I would say I understand why. After awareness comes desire. Desire to participate and support the change. Actually, it's a personal decision to get on board. We know people can choose not to participate in the change, or they can choose to misleadingly comply. Desire is achieved when I say I have decided to participate, and that is based on what motivates me and what motivates the organization, and then what is in it for me. After desire comes knowledge. Knowledge is I need to know what to do during the change, after the change, and in order to change. Unfortunately, this is where we usually default. We just send people to trainings when we need them to make a change. But knowledge without awareness and desire falls on deaf ears. We need people to be able to say, I understand why, I have decided to, and if we can get into those 2 points, then we can say, I know how. Fourth element is ability. Ability to implement those required skills and behavior. And this is where the change actually happens. I'm following the new process, using the new tool, using the new system, demonstrating the new critical behavior, demonstrating the new mindset. I'm able to show up in the new way that I need to as a result of this initiative. The last element is reinforcement. And as I mentioned earlier, it is our natural, psychological, physiological reaction to go back to what we used to do. And if we are not intentional about reinforcing to ensure that the change sticks, to sustain the change, we're going to lose traction and go back to what you used to be. So reinforcement is when the person would say, I will continue to. Actually, this is one of my favorite slides. It's EDCAR on a page. And EDCAR gives us the outcome that we are desiring. Now, the powerful thing is that EDCAR helps us understand how one person makes the transition. So it helps us define success at that individual level. Now, even if a change impacts a team of 5 or a work group of 20, or maybe a department of 1,000, the change succeeds only when each person who needs to show up in a new way has awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. If each of those 1,000 people can say, I understand why, I have decided to, I know how, I'm able to, and I will continue to, then and only then we will achieve successful change. And EDCAR also helps us understand the individual nature of those journeys. And here I want to highlight that we each start at different points in time, moving through EDCAR at a different pace. It takes us different amounts of time to move through A, D, K, A, and R. And it is the nature of those individual changes that achieves organizational outcomes. Now, our goal is to ensure that people are ready when we need them to be. And what we're going to do here is we are going to map EDCAR milestones to a project lifecycle. We always know what day we are going to kick off. And hopefully we know when we are going to have that celebrating party and going live. And hopefully sometimes out in the future, outcomes will be realized. Now, I'm going to take one of the A's from the EDCAR model and put it underneath go live. Which A do you think it should be? And here we're going to use the poll again. And I want you to go ahead and annotate on the poll, EV, which of the A's from EDCAR do you think it is? Remember, there are 2 A's. There's awareness and there is ability. So come on, let's see which A is going to be aligned with go live. Any answers coming up? You have 2 A's, awareness and ability. Or are we having some technical issues over here? Looks like we're having some technical issues.
Yes, I think there are technical issues.
Oh, no, it's coming. Awareness. Any other ability? Ability. Few more coming up. Okay, so we have 2 ability, 1 awareness. What I want here to say is that awareness at go live means that the project is off the rails. Ability at go live is when people can say, I am able to. And that is the definition of successful change. So moving on. Once we map ability to go live, we can start to back up and say, when and how are we going to build awareness, desire, and knowledge? And what are we going to do to reinforce and sustain the change? So as I mentioned, the unfortunate reality is the email on Monday for training on Tuesday for go live on Wednesday. So we do a bunch of trainings right before we hope people are ready. and that's not going to get us the result that we need. So outcomes desired is A, D, K, A, and R times the number of people who have to show up in a new way for this project to deliver results. The way we achieve that is through the activities of change management. And these activities required begin in context. Change management does not happen in a vacuum. Change management happens relative to three other elements of successful initiative. Successful change has governance and direction set by our leadership and sponsorship. Then it has a project management where technical side is designed, developed, and delivered within the constraint of time, cost, and scope. And now change management has context. It is the people side where we ensure that the people engage, adopt, and use the solution. And in the center of the pro-side change triangle, which we refer to as PCT, is success. That's the reason for change. The organizational benefits and project objectives we identified back in Tenet 1. So the PCT model gives us context for how change management relates to these other components. The activities required happen in a process as well. The ProClipse three-phase process is an outcome-oriented process that is adaptable, flexible, and repeatable by design. It provides us with specific tools, activities, and steps to achieve change success and create the value for the organization. In phase one, we develop and customize a scaled approach based on our situational awareness and understanding of that change and who is going to be impacted. In phase two, we create and develop the specific deliverables and plans that will help impacted people through A, D, K, A, and R. And in phase three, we take specific steps to ensure that the change sticks by understanding the progress we made, what gaps exist, and how we can celebrate, and then transition ownership of this change back to the organization to become business as usual. So the activities required happen in context, and they happen as a process. And they also happen by a system. The change practitioner is only one of 4 roles that we identify in this system that brings to life the people side of change. And here, as you see on the slide, we have 2 roles. We have the employee-facing role and the enabling role. In the employee-facing roles, we have 2 roles. We have the sponsors and the people managers. Now, what is the role of the sponsor? The sponsors have a role of being active and visible, participating throughout the life of the initiative. They need to build and maintain a healthy coalition, and they need to be the face and voice of the business reasons for change. And these 3 roles, we call them the ABCs. Now, the front line or the people manager are the other crucial employee-facing role. These are the people that are supporting their direct reports through their individual personal change journeys. And luckily, ProSci has helped us understand and better define the role of those people manager in terms of being communicator, liaison, advocate, resistant manager, and coach. Now, as for the change practitioner, we are over on the enabling side, role side. We are the ones who bring structure and intent to the people side of change. And we work to equip and enable the employee-facing role. We also collaborate with the project managers to build a unified approach to moving the change forward. Now, the second enabling role, as you might have guessed, is our project manager. They are in charge of managing time, scope, and cost to design, develop, and deliver the solution we need to realize an opportunity or solve a particular problem that is in front of us. Now, we need the project manager to collaborate with the change practitioner to ensure that we have that unified approach. So the activities required happen in context, as a process and by a system, and through the specific levers. And if we can get all those pieces moving in the right direction, we can support our impacted people through A, D, K, A, and R, because we have the right tool set with the right senders, and we are doing that in the right order. Now, I'm going to give you another 60 seconds to think and reflect on your project in relation to Tenet 4. What is your change? So we're going to start timing now. What is your change management approach going to be? Are you going to use a structured approach? Is it scaled and customized? Do you have dedicated resources? Do you have a budget? Are you aligning with best practices? Are you treating it in context as a process, by a system, and through specific levers? You know, all of these questions are on your slide.
Timer.
Thank you. So to summarize, Tenet 4, we say change management leverages the normal mechanism within an organization to influence and develop employees through broad activities such as communication, training, and visible sponsorship. And at the same time, change management enables action at an individual employee level through coaching and resistance management. Now, this leads us to our last tenet, Tenet 5. Here's where we apply change management to realize the benefit and desired outcome of change. And the plain language question is, how will driving adoption and usage improve results? So we are going to close the loop between being thoughtful and intentional about preparing, equipping, and supporting our people through change and achieving the desired outcome. Now, the ability to successfully deliver organizational benefits and project objectives is directly impacted by how effectively we manage the people side of change. I have here a whole menu, a menu of why we apply change management. Example, to improve the likelihood of change outcome, to meet and exceed objectives on time and on budget, to avoid some of those negative consequences, and to ultimately achieve what we set out to, etc. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to move through each of those. And as I'm doing so, I want you to think of some ideas that you can add in the bottom right-hand corner of your paper. Ideas about the value and impact you can have by bringing good change management to your initiative. So for the first point, we apply change management to improve the likelihood of change outcomes and to achieve results on time and on budget. Here, ProSci has over 6,000 data points sitting behind those correlation charts. That the better we do change management, the more likely we are going to meet objectives. So if we go from poor to excellent change management, we get a 6-fold bump in the likelihood of meeting objectives, and we get 3-fold increase if we go only from poor to fair. Additionally, the correlation holds that the better we manage the people side of change, the more likely we are to finish on or ahead of schedule and on or ahead of budget, because we know that organizational outcomes are the collective results of individual change. The second thing is we apply change management to mitigate the consequences of the Swiss cheese future state. And we saw earlier a picture of the Swiss cheese future state and how it looks like if we don't help individuals to get to their own future state. Now, if each individual does not get to their own future state, it erodes the value of the project or the initiative, and we will end up with lower ROIs. we start to create this history of failed changes and not achieve the improvement we set out to, and we just don't get what we hoped or expected or invested the time and energy to try to make this initiative happen. Second, we apply change management to minimize the negative consequences of change. We know change is hard, and we know that there are certainly some negative consequences that people will experience through their transition, such as frustration, confusion, resistance, disengagement, complete failure of the initiative, because we have not brought our people along on the journey. So we apply change management to minimize some of those negative consequences as well. Third, we know if we do not support adoption, the third point is if we do not support adoption and usage, there's going to be excessive costs and avoidable risks that will be incurred at the individual level, at the project level, and at the same time at the organization. If we do not support adoption and usage, we have a lot of costs that's happening, as I said, at the individual level, at the project level, and at the organizational level. And we are overwhelmed by these excessive costs and additional risks that could have been avoided. So if we have paid attention to our people, a lot of these based on those, these re-cost, redesign, rescope, retrain, and these three things become literally the most expensive two letters of the alphabet. And now if you look at the next slide, this is going to be an eye chart, and this actually was meant to be. This is a laundry list of the cost and risk of poor adoption and usage. And I'm going to highlight only a few, like attrition, delayed timelines, less productivity, no result resistance, skepticism. And here my advice to you as change practitioner is to have about 10 of these printed out. And anytime you sit down with a project manager, senior leader, sponsor at the beginning of an initiative, give them a highlighter to identify which of these costs and risks are the things that they are worried most about. Because with change management, we can help them reduce and avoid those costs and risks. So we apply change management to drive people-side outcomes variable. We know that ROI is constrained or enhanced by people-side variables like speed of adoption, how quickly we get people into the new system or the new tools or the new jobs. And also with ultimate utilization, how many started showing up in the new way and brought the change to life. And the last one is proficiency, how well are they doing it once they begin to embrace, adopt, and use the change to the way they do their job. Now, we apply change management to improve speed of adoption, utilization, and proficiency, because these drive return on investment. And in the end, that is what it's all about. It's capturing the people-dependent return on investment of our initiative. We apply change management to capture that people-dependent ROI. And remember, for our most important, our most strategic changes, that is a significant portion of the ROI. Because in the end, it's about results and outcomes. In 2009, at the ProClipse Global Conference, which later became the ACMP Conference, Jeff Hyatt got up on stage and said, "The only reason we do change management is to drive better results and outcomes of the change initiative we are already investing in and taking on. It's about helping our senior leaders, our project managers, our organization achieve what they already signed up for faster and more completely than they thought they would." So that is our summary of Tenet 5. We apply change management for a whole host of reasons. And now we're not going to do the last exercise, but I really want you to think about the following question. What is the value you can create when you do a job or a better job of preparing, equipping, and supporting your people through the change journeys? And I want you to consider these bullet points that you see on the slides. And by doing those, this concluding principle is very essential, and it is this, in the change management. While project management is focused on the realization of the technical solution, change management is focused on the achievement of the desired outcome or the results of the change by managing people through transition. And this is the 5 tenets. And what it's all about is a simple, structured, logical way to explain the what and why of change management, Most importantly, because we are doing it in context, and how we do that by anchoring the conversation to the reality of change, that we do it for a reason, it happens one person at a time, that our outcome depends on those individual transitions. Then we can position change management as the reality of how change actually comes to life. And this completes our session for today.